Hi, this is Jason with Green Star Productions. Thanks for tuning into my channel. And this is the second half of the construction video for my new desk that I made out of this board, this half round board you see here that's just been roughly dressed out and there was a tongue put on one side and a groove on the other. And I had this piece left over and I thought, hey, if I use that as a desktop, I'd have a real interesting, you know, visual contour on that desk with a round bottom and then a flat top. Plus, with this trench down the middle, I could finally experiment with doing a river table style decoration on a piece of furniture. So, as you see here, I've just drawn a line down the center of the board, just so I can level it easier. And I'm displaying all the sides of it here in this video. Sorry, this is an older video, and again, had not yet quite gotten the hang of framing the shot correctly. I do love the knot holes on this thing as well. It's because as you'll see here once the resin's done, it's real nice contrast with brown and blue being contrasting colors, as well as the base yellow of the board itself. So my basic idea here was I filed the tongues off of the two sides, one of the short sides and then of course the long side, sanded them down, and then proceeded to level it out and fill the trenches with resin as you see here. Now, my uh, basic idea with this was I didn't want to just pour a solid color down the center trench of this. And as you see, I did this along the groove along the side because it just wasn't wide enough to do anything interesting with visually. So I thought I'd try the uh, mixing the colors in when they were half set up, as you see, primarily done with jewelry or other decorative pieces that are done with resin. I thought, hey, that could give a real interesting fluid-like effect, and I'm a sucker for fluid effects. All right, and as you see here, I've got the board just laid out, and I've already done the groove as you see here, and I added some blue to the knot holes. As you see here, I taped off the end since that groove extends all the way through the board. I didn't want it, of course, to all drop off. And I just poured a real shallow layer of clear resin down, and then I put in the blue. And as you see here, I'm adding the light silver, or as the bottle says, this is called macro pearl. And both these are just jacquard mica powders. Now my idea with this was to swirl these and end up with have the colors swirl together but not mix, so you have the real interesting tumbling over each other effects. And as you'll see here, I didn't quite succeed on this first one. Between not letting it, I didn't let the resin sit long enough. Yeah, I misgauged the timer, and what eventually you'll see here is that now, while it has some distinct swirls at this point, which I wasn't unhappy with, I tried, as you'll see here in just a minute, I added some more clear after I'd done the mixing, trying to get an idea of visual separation between some of the spots in the wood, just to try to convey the idea of movement. Unfortunately, that doesn't turn out quite as I'd hoped, because as you'll see here again after I finish pouring the clear, that I ended up over mixing these, and what I ended up with, instead of two distinct colors, I ended up with one color that was a silvery blue, which was just not my idea at all. And I was just trying to be careful at this point. I didn't want the river to really overrun that center trench and have it uh, flowing up onto the flat surface of the wood, because I knew I was just going to end up filing it down. So instead of just pouring the whole cup full of the resin at once, I was trying to dribble and drizzle it in so I could control how much so that I could control how much resin was on the board so I wasted less of it. And here you see I finally got my camera angle right where I'd wanted it. Yeah, there you go. Now you see it. Right where I'd added the clear at the bottom, towards the bottom of the screen. You see that that's what I ended up with. And here I am proceeding to make it worse. I was trying to put those swirls in it, but as you see, it just blends together into one solid silvery blue mass. Which, if that had been the effect that I'd wanted in the first place, I'd have done that. But wasn't what I'd wanted, so I ended up going back later. Ugh. Almost painful to watch yourself make these kind of errors if you have a perfectionist streak at all. Alright, and here you see I tried, in some spots it actually turned out I'd gotten the clear to do what I'd wanted so that it swirled around the blue. But overall, I was just not happy with this indistinguishable mass. So here you see what I'm doing is I've decided to go ahead and try to pseudo finish off the bottom, since I'd plugged all of those holes with resin as well. And I thought, all right, well, while I try to figure out something else to do, I'm just going to finish the bottom of this off. I'll take off the excess here. Just doing something, fun and mindless, like sanding. Like this gives the creative juices some time to flow. And as you see here, this I tried using it on its lowest setting, but this power sander was just, I guess it just has too much horsepower for trying to do this board when it's round side down, so it kept turning over, and I was just getting unhappy with it. So as you see, I just threw it in the vise here, gave it a couple of quick whacks with the power sander, sprayed it off, sprayed me off, sprayed the dog off, and called it a day. After I discovered that one last rough spot. And again, here we are looking at this, and it just, the longer I looked at this, the less and less happy with it I was. So what I eventually did was I took it out and just took my hand router, a trim router, and just took out a real shallow layer. I took out probably a half an inch eventually. This was my first attempt was this colored UV resin, which I thought, hey, maybe I can make something decorative on top of it and it won't be so bad. It didn't work out quite as well as I'd wanted. For some reason, the heat of the sun, I'm guessing, just caused it to dry out way too fast. And I didn't rough up the underlying resin, so it really didn't have anything to bond with. So again, here you see it. This is after I've routed out that half inch or so. Left me with a decent base, and I thought, all right, well, if I do this right, it'll just form an interesting background color. And here's what I eventually ended up with on round 2. I, again, poured just a clear layer of resin, and then I waited a long time with this resin, with this batch. And as you see, I ended up with those distinct swirls of silver and blue. And I am so much happier with this. This is exactly what I had in mind the first time. But I just hadn't timed out the resin curing quite right. But it's through making those errors that you learn how to do something correctly. The only thing I have to say I was not quite pleased with was I'd used a little too much of the pigmented resin on this section. I didn't have quite as much of the clear playing in as I'd wanted. And this is the next day, and you see this is what it looks like after I'd let it dry overnight. Ended up with that nice silver and blue swirls, and you can see the blue that's left in the knot holes. Again, I just love the color contrast. And this blue by Jacquard, I believe this is the this was the turquoise. No, I'm sorry, I said it right the first time. This was the sapphire blue. Just comes out so rich against the browns and yellows. Now this is just the same night I've just taped off the sides with some masking tape and then a layer of duct tape, and I just poured a real thin layer of resin over the top of that. Didn't feel it was really necessary to tape this part, videotape this part. And here's what the table looked like after I'd done the initial cutout on the tabletop for the legs to fit in, and I ended up I cut them too deep, so I had to patch it with Bondo, and that's what the gray sections are. And I put some feet and then a leg brace on it. Again, that's screws and Bondo. And here's what it looks like after I did the first sand down on that Bondo. So I figured, all right, well, let's see how that looks color wise. Let's see what I should do with that. Ended up being fairly satisfied with it, except here on the bottom. It's like, all right, well, this was exactly the project that convinced me I should invest in a palm sander instead of just trying to use manual sanding sponges or anything like that, because my big power sander wasn't going to fit. And this is a day or so later. I'd sanded everything down again. I'd finished off the end here, as you see, with some black acrylic paint, and then I put a coat of polyurethane on that very end, and then on the black pieces on the feet, and then the leg supports. Let that dry off, and then decide, all right, well, let me take this outside, get some nice pictures of it in the sun. And while those pieces were drying out, and I was kind of happy with this. I was pretty happy at this point. It was only 3 or 4 days after that I discovered that this desktop was just a bit too narrow. So having another piece of that same half round, that log, but one that was a bit narrower, I thought, all right, well, if I don't like the width of the desktop, well, let's just double up what we did the first time and see what we ended up with. Now, as you'll see here in just a minute, this is what the desktop looks like after that final coat of resin, and I just had slapped a couple of symbols on the top of it. This is the symbols for mystery, art, and knowledge, things that have really played into my life. I thought, hey, that'd be fun to have on my desktop. And then I poured another coat of resin on it to give it a final level. And this is what it was like for, again, that 3 or 4 days before I discovered, all right, this desktop is just not wide enough. I wanted a narrow desk. This one turned out to be too narrow. So again, I just mirrored the same thing I did on that first half round section of desktop on the narrower piece. I'm even happier with the way that came out, as you'll see here in just a minute. I realized also at this point, taking this video, that I needed to fix that screw head that you saw poking out past the Bondo cover up. At this point, I took it outside after everything had been polyurethaned again, and then I just sprayed it down with my garden hose, just because there are some bits of dust and sawdust and the like that just are not going to get blown off with an air hose. So figured, hey, water will do the trick. And I'm pretty happy with that, with the view of that blue strip right down the one side of my desk. That's actually the side I sit on, so I see that blue strip every time I sit down at the desk. And there's the dog again, who I had to fight with the hose I had to fight him with the hose and spray him with the hose as I was spraying down the desk. All right, and here you see the second set of legs I did for the desk. Now these leg supports were a bit more banged up, so I tried patching them in some spots with some Bondo and making it a little more stable and friendly, because I hadn't intended on building a second set of legs for this desk, but this is what I had on hand, and I figured, hey, we'll try the Bondo again, see how that works, and since it did pretty well the first time. So I just built the forms again out of freezer paper and duct tape, And there you see the colored resin on top. And this one, again, these legs just take up so much resin. I'm still amazed by how much it took for me to actually make these legs. I think I went through, between the two sets of legs, I think I went through almost a full gallon of resin just getting those into shape. All right, and I kind of jumping the gun here, but this is what the desk looks like day to day. There you can see the two sections of the wood, and underneath my desk caddy and all the computer accessories that are on top of it. Now, what I love, one of the things I love about this desk is that I did offset the legs. So instead of being on the ends like the others, well, I'll get back to it. As you see here, this is the river down the middle of the second piece of desktop. And I'm much happier with this section. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the first one, but I was able to get more clear in this second one. As you see, the video will show a clean desktop here in just a minute. I took everything off and shot this next section. As you see, the top is just bolted together, and I put those legs on the front, and cutting those out to fit around the rounded bottom of the desk was fun. But yeah, I'm still very happy with this project, and that'll do it.